2 years ago, just after turning 18 and starting college, my parents told me it was time to become independent. They had me sit down for a talk about the importance of learning the value of money and self-sufficiency. They decided they would no longer fund my college tuition and expected me to handle it on my own. They mentioned they'd provide occasional support if absolutely necessary, but they preferred I figure things out by myself. This decision was unexpected since our relationship had always been good, but I didn't argue. I figured it was a chance for me to learn and grow, so I accepted their terms. I had saved up some money from part-time jobs over the years, so I wasn't too worried. After getting accepted into college, I planned to work throughout my studies to cover my tuition and other expenses. For the past 2 years, I've been managing all my costs by working and living very frugally. It's been challenging. Balancing work and classes is exhausting, and my pay isn't very high. Despite the difficulties, I've been pushing through, finding a way to make it work. Now, after a big family dispute, my dad wants me to come back. I'm still processing everything and figuring out my next steps. Sometimes, it feels quite overwhelming for me. I do occasionally ask my parents for money, and they help with minor expenses, but I try to avoid it as much as possible. I keep thinking about how they emphasized the importance of independence when I turned 18, but now I'm questioning if that was genuine advice or just an excuse to avoid paying for my college. My younger sister recently turned 18 and is about to start college, which is the same age I was when I got that independence speech. I assumed they would take a similar approach with her, but a few days ago, my sister told me that our parents have offered to cover all her college expenses. She was shocked, knowing how things were for me, and I was equally confused. My parents had previously claimed they weren't financially able to support both of us in college, so I thought they were pushing me to be independent for that reason. My sister, also puzzled, spoke to our parents about it, but they told her not to worry. After hearing this, she suggested that I talk directly to them to get some clarity. I called my mother right away and got straight to the point, asking them why they decided to pay for my sister's college expenses. I was furious when I found out that my parents were covering all of my sister's college tuition and expenses while they had encouraged me to be independent and fund my own education. Balancing work and academics had become increasingly challenging for me, and my GPA wasn't where I wanted it to be. I was still struggling with money, making the whole situation feel utterly pointless. It seemed deeply unfair that they were supporting my sister entirely while leaving me to fend for myself. When I confronted my mother, she put me on speakerphone, and my dad joined the call. They initially came up with excuses, saying they had thought they might not be able to support both of us financially, but recently realized they could. They claimed they didn't think I would take it personally, but I wasn't buying that story. My mother is an accountant. There's no way she didn't know they could afford it. It seemed like this was a plan all along, and I wanted to get to the bottom of it. After some back and forth, they finally admitted that they decided to pay for my sister's college because they thought she was a better student and a safer investment than me. Hearing that was incredibly painful. It hurt to realize they didn't believe I was worth investing in, even though my sister might be academically stronger. While I might not have been a standout student, I wasn't that bad either. It was incredibly painful to hear that my parents had decided I wasn't worthy of being sent to college and having a comfortable life. I don't want to come off as entitled, but it felt like they were treating me unfairly. On top of that, they had lied to me. I might have respected their decision if they had been honest from the start, but instead, they manipulated me into thinking they were helping me become independent when, in reality, they just wanted an excuse to avoid paying for my education. When I confronted them, they tried to justify their actions by saying they genuinely wanted the best for me, but weren't sure if it would be worth the expense. They claimed they believed my sister might choose an expensive college because of her excellent grades, so they needed to save up to support her. They said they didn't want to hurt my feelings by being upfront, but that was pointless because knowing the truth hurt even more. If they had been honest from the beginning, it might have softened the blow. Instead, their deceit made the situation worse. After hearing their explanation, I was too upset to continue the conversation, so I ended the call abruptly. I then texted my sister to tell her what I had learned. Since we're close, she deserved to know the truth. She was shocked and dismayed by our parents' actions. My sister initially said she wouldn't accept a single dollar from our parents, but I told her not to be unreasonable. She's a bright student and truly deserved their support, so I convinced her to accept their offer and attend the college of her choice. I also told her that I wouldn't be in contact with our parents for a while because what they had done was deeply hurtful, and I needed space from them. We're about to go on Thanksgiving and Christmas break in a couple of weeks, and I had planned to go home. However, given the recent events, I no longer feel comfortable doing so. I didn't mention anything else to my sister, but she must have informed our parents that I wouldn't be coming home for the holidays. I was considering staying with my grandparents, but for now, I just needed to avoid seeing my parents. Unfortunately, my sister's decision to tell them led to an even worse situation. The day after our conversation, she reached out to tell me that our parents had been arguing loudly after she shared that I wouldn't be coming home. She hadn't intended to eavesdrop, but their shouting made it impossible not to overhear. It turned out that the decision to make me pay for my own college was mostly my mother's idea. She had convinced my father that they should save money in case my sister chose to attend college abroad. Given her excellent grades and her desire to travel, it seemed like a plausible choice for her. My mother wanted to keep all options open for my sister and save as much as possible. My mother's decision to save as much money as possible for my sister's sake had been the driving force behind convincing my father to agree with her. Now that I had learned the truth and decided to cut ties with them, my father seemed more upset than anyone else. He was blaming my mother entirely, claiming that she manipulated him into agreeing to the plan, which ended up alienating me. Because of this, I no longer felt comfortable coming home for the holidays. While I'm angry with both of my parents, it doesn't seem fair for my father to place all the blame on my mother. He was equally involved in the decision. My sister told me they had been arguing nonstop, and apparently, my father even threatened to leave my mother if she didn't persuade me to come back home for the holidays. She shared this with me to prepare me for when my mother reached out, and I appreciated the heads up. After reflecting on everything, I concluded that their marital issues and their feelings of upset were not my responsibility. I was already dealing with enough on my own and couldn't take on their problems as well. I decided that I wouldn't go home for the holidays, regardless of what my mother said. When she called yesterday, I answered with the clear intention of sticking to my decision. If my father chose to leave her over this, it was their issue, not mine. When my parents insisted that I handle my own financial problems and emphasized the importance of independence, I decided to give them a taste of their own medicine. I thought it was only fair to expect them to deal with their own issues and not rely on me to solve them. However, during a conversation with my mom, she accused me of being heartless and making a mountain out of a molehill. She claimed that I wasn't entitled to their financial support and that I was being a brat for feeling wronged by their refusal to pay for my college tuition. I found this offensive because my frustration wasn't about the lack of financial support itself, but about the unfair treatment between me and my sister, and the manipulation they used to make me think their actions were beneficial for me. If they hadn't constantly preached about independence, I might have taken out a student loan, which would have been easier to manage. However, I didn't want to involve them as co-signers, as that wouldn't align with their idea of independence. My mother argued that the reason for the different treatment was the disparity in our grades, which I found quite hurtful. While it's true my sister has always been an outstanding student and I'm proud of her for that, I'm not an idiot either. I've excelled in some areas and struggled in others, just like anyone else. I've always been strong in my chosen major, and I feel my parents should have considered this before making such a manipulative decision. My mother and I ended up arguing for nearly 15 minutes, and we still couldn't reach any resolution. I was adamant that I wouldn't be coming home for the holidays, and that decision was final. I told her that they had messed up significantly, and I wasn't interested in seeing them right now. My mother thinks I'm being unreasonable and that I need to mature instead of being petty. She believes I'm acting entitled, while I see her behavior as manipulative. So, we're at an impasse. I feel conflicted because I don't want my parents to end up divorced because of this, even though I'm unsure if my dad would actually leave her over something like this. They've had intense arguments before, but my dad has never suggested leaving, which makes the current situation even more concerning. They've been together since high school, so if he were to actually say he's leaving her, it would be a huge deal. I'm feeling torn about not going home for the holidays after discovering they were willing to cover my sister's college tuition, but refused to do the same for me. Update 1. Thanks for all the comments on my original post. It's been 3 days since I talked to my mother, and things are still awkward. I've been keeping in touch with my sister, who reassures me that I don't need to worry about the situation because she understands I'm struggling right now. I've also decided to quit my job. It became clear that juggling work and studying was overwhelming me. I was spending half my time at work and the other half trying to catch up academically, and it was taking a toll on me. I had become so consumed by work and academics that I had no time for the things I genuinely enjoyed. For the past couple of years, I felt like a zombie, overwhelmed by stress to the point where I hadn't even gone out with my friends in weeks. This weekend, I finally decided to break the routine and go out, and my friends were surprised since I usually stayed holed up in my room, working from home. I've decided it's time to live a little. I also talked to my grandparents on my dad's side about everything going on. After a brief discussion, they offered to help me with a loan or any financial support I might need. With just a few months left before graduation, I accepted their offer and they will cover my expenses for the remaining time. I also have some of my own savings, so I'm not too worried about money anymore. They also invited me to stay with them during the holidays, which is a relief since I'm not ready to go back to my parents' place. My grandparents were shocked when they learned why my parents hadn't covered my college tuition. My grandpa had even offered to pay for it before, but I had declined at the time, wanting to be independent. Now, I regret that decision since striving for independence led me to lose so much, all because my parents pushed me in that direction. I realize now that I should have been more cautious. Update 2. It's been a week since I last spoke to my mother. Since I wasn't responding to her messages or calls, she decided to show up at my college. I really wasn't expecting her to show up. Her recent messages had been about how I needed to talk to my father because he was very upset. She also kept insisting that she and my father loved both of their kids equally and that they hadn't intended to treat me unfairly. They were just trying to be practical. None of this made any difference to me. I was angry with both of them and wasn't ready to talk. So, I had been ignoring her calls. When she showed up today, I couldn't ignore her any longer. She called me multiple times without a response, and then texted, saying I needed to meet her because she had driven all the way to see me and wasn't leaving until we talked. I tried to tell her I wasn't in the right state of mind to talk, but she refused to leave. Eventually, I agreed to meet her. We decided to go to a nearby Wendy's to talk. I chose this spot because I didn't want to risk running into anyone from college if we ended up having a heated discussion. Since it was evening, I knew the place would be relatively empty. When we arrived, she ordered a bunch of food for me despite my protests. She insisted on doing this as a way to make it up to me. Once we finally started talking, she began by apologizing profusely. She said she was genuinely sorry for how she had treated me and admitted that there was no excuse for her actions. She said she had been trying to justify everything to me and to herself, but she had come to realize that what she did was wrong. There was no denying it. She was there to own up to her mistakes and ask for my forgiveness, hoping I'd at least consider coming home for the holidays since we clearly had a lot to discuss. I told her that I had already spoken to my grandparents, and they had offered me a place to stay during the holiday season. I said I was willing to meet her halfway. I could stay with them for a few days if I felt up to it, but I needed more time away from them to process everything. She seemed a bit disappointed by this, but she accepted it, knowing it was the best she was going to get from me. She then mentioned that my sister had been accepted into several prestigious colleges, but had been insisting she didn't want our parents' financial help. This made me feel guilty because I knew she was doing it out of consideration for me. I assured my mother not to worry about it. I'd make sure my sister accepted their support and didn't sacrifice her opportunities. I love my sister and don't want her to go through the same struggles I did. Being independent and paying for college on your own isn't as glamorous as it's made out to be. It might sound entitled, but I'd have preferred parents who covered everything until I could support myself. Honestly, people with wealthy parents who can afford to spend thousands on their education have it much easier. We're only fooling ourselves if we think we're superior to those with financial support just because we're independent. Life is simply easier for them, and it's practical. People might disagree, but deep down, we all know it's true. I reassured my mother that I would ensure my sister accepted their financial help for college because if she tried to juggle work and studying, she'd likely struggle, as she's not accustomed to that kind of load. I don't want her grades to suffer like mine did. I couldn't resist asking her how things were going between her and my father, especially since I'd heard he had threatened to leave her. My mother looked a bit taken aback by the question, but told me that things were improving. They had decided to attend marriage counseling after numerous arguments, which had mostly been about my situation. Surprisingly, my father hadn't tried to reach out to me since our last conversation, where I learned why they hadn't funded my tuition. When I asked my mother about it, she said he had been extremely upset and wanted to contact me several times, but kept second-guessing himself and couldn't muster the courage to do so. She had urged him to send a text and just get it over with, but he continued to overthink it, which is why he hadn't reached out yet. My mother's eyes were filled with tears as she spoke about this, and it made me feel awful because I know my dad isn't very emotional. If he's reacting this way, things must be really difficult for him. After hearing about my dad's state, I made an impulsive decision and asked my mother to put him on a call right then. Even though I told my mother that I just wanted to speak with him. I wasn't expecting an apology or anything like that right now. I simply missed talking to him. Before the arguments, we'd have calls every other day because I was always closer to my dad. It's no surprise he stood up for me this time. Despite their mistakes, they're my parents, and I'm willing to forgive them and work through this. It might not be a decision everyone agrees with, but it's mine. My mother called him while we were sitting together, and he picked up right away. He wasn't on speaker yet, but his first question was whether I was all right, which made me quite emotional. I didn't let my mother answer and just said I was fine and wanted to talk to him. I then took the phone from her. He was quiet for a moment, and I told him I was still processing everything. I had forgiven them, but needed time to work through things, and if he kept second-guessing himself, we wouldn't be able to resolve anything. To my surprise, he started crying and completely broke down on the phone. He told me he was deeply sorry for everything that had happened. I could see my mother trying to hide her tears across the table. I felt emotional too, but I knew we couldn't all be crying at once, so I tried to stay calm and continue the conversation. He expressed his regret over how things had turned out, and he assured me that he never intended to hurt me and acknowledged that both he and my mother had made mistakes. They genuinely wanted to make things right. I told him I needed some time away from them to sort things out in my own mind, but I was open to giving our relationship a chance. He acknowledged that even that was a significant step for me and expressed his willingness to do anything to make amends. We had a brief discussion and agreed that I would stay with them for at least a week and a half during the holidays so we could spend some time together as a family. We also decided to try family therapy to address our issues. My parents were already planning on marriage counseling, and now the four of us, including my sister, will also seek family therapy. Since I'll need to return to college after the break, we'll find a therapist who offers online sessions, but we're committed to working on our family dynamic. I don't want our family to become one of those distant families with no ties to each other. That's the update from my meeting with my mother. I'm still processing everything we discussed, but I feel considerably better and more hopeful about the future. Fingers crossed that things will work out. Update 3. Hi everyone, it's been nearly a year since my last post. I finally graduated and, on the bright side, found a job within weeks of finishing school. I'm working now and, thankfully, not miserable anymore. I no longer have the stress of studying and can focus on my new role. I'm now settled into a routine where I focus on my job, return to my apartment, spend time with my roommate, and unwind in the evenings. It's a comfortable life and I'm getting used to it. Many of you had concerns about my decision to give my parents another chance and to work on our family relationship. I'm happy to report that things are going well. We've been through therapy together and have worked through our issues. My grandparents, as promised, covered my tuition for the final months of school, and my sister decided to accept our parents' financial support for college. After hearing about the challenges I faced, she recognized it was the best choice. To make amends, my parents have also offered to cover my rent for a few months while I save up from my job. I appreciate their effort to make things right. Overall, things are going great, and I don't have any complaints. Thank you all for your support and concern. It truly means a lot to me.